Call the meeting to order. We're going to be tight on time, so we're going to try to get us back on track here. Bienvenue à la...
Welcome to the 65th meeting of the Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. We recognize that our meeting today is taking place on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nations. Our meeting today is being held in a hybrid format in accordance with the Order of the House adopted on Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, and members will be present in person or on the Zoom application. The proceedings will be published in the House of Commons website. The webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the whole committee.
Speaking the official language of your choice, interpretation services are available for this meeting in French or English. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen or on your console of either floor, no interpretation, English or French. Please select your language now. If interpretation is lost at any point, please inform me immediately and we will ensure interpretation is properly restored before resuming proceedings. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole committee is meeting in person in a committee room. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. S'il vous plaît, adressez vos...
Please address the chair.
Slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they are participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on November 21st, 2022, we are commencing the study of the Office of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on the research and comparative analysis on the estimates of the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs and the Department of Indigenous Services. That is a mouthful. Joining us today to discuss the report is Yves Giroux, Parliamentary Budget Officer, and Mark Mahabir, Director of Policy and General Counsel. Please correct me if I'm saying your name incorrectly. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us today. You will have 5 minutes to make an opening statement, after which questions from the members will follow. Please begin.
Madame la Présidente.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear before you today. I don't believe I'll need all 5 minutes. We're pleased to be here today to present the findings of our report entitled Research and Comparative Analysis of CIRNAC and ISC, which we were honored to prepare at the request of this committee. With me today, I have Mark Mahabir, Director of Policy and General Counsel. The Parliamentary Budget Officer supports Parliament by providing independent and non-partisan economic and financial analysis to parliamentarians. As the legislation states, we provide this analysis for the purposes of raising the quality of parliamentary debate and promoting greater budget transparency and accountability. I will now continue in English.
Consistent with the PBO's legislated mandate, at the request of this committee, my office prepared an independent analysis of the estimates of the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs and the Department of Indigenous Services Canada. Our report presents analysis for the 2015-16 to 2022-23 period. Over this time, financial resources allocated to providing Indigenous services increased significantly. To evaluate how effective the organizations providing these services were in using these resources, a quantitative and qualitative approach using publicly available data was employed. The analysis conducted indicates that the increased spending did not result in a commensurate improvement in the ability of these organizations to achieve the goals that they had set for themselves. This was partly driven by the volatility in the departmental result indicators. Many of these indicators were added or removed over the course of the period, preventing results from being collected due to data collection lags. Some indicators lack target values and completion dates altogether. Based on the qualitative review of the department's ability to achieve the targets specified has declined. Based on the qualitative review, the department's ability to achieve the targets specified has declined. We would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have regarding our analysis or other PBO work. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Great. Will save us some time. I appreciate that. We'll begin our first round of questions, starting with Mr. Vidal. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for being here today and for the work you've done on this. You actually quoted from your executive summary already about the fact that financial resources allocated to providing Indigenous services increased significantly over this period, and the period you talked about was 2015-16 to 22-23. You went and talked about the quantitative and the qualitative component of your report. So for a couple of minutes, I want to just drill into the quantitative part, and I'll come back later and hit some of the qualitative stuff, okay? But just doing a little bit looking on my own, if you go back and go back to the 2015-16 and a little bit prior to that, even the range of the spending on Indigenous affairs, which was through INAC back then, was in the range of $7.5 to $9 billion over those 3 years. And by the time we get to 21-22, that number was about $29 billion. The sub-Cs for 22-23 say that number's $58 billion, and the mains for 23-24 start the process for next year at $49 billion. In that same time frame, the number of FTEs has increased from about 4,500 to just where we're projecting now about 9,200 for the coming fiscal year. These are really big numbers, and these are really big changes. And I just, in the context of the quantitative component of your analysis, can you just speak to the significance or the magnitude of these changing numbers? And then I have a follow-up with some other parts I want to talk about.
So the increases in the numbers of both departments combined are due to the fact that there's been a reorganization, notably the transfer of some responsibilities that were in other departments other than the old Aboriginal Affairs and now Indigenous Services and Crown Indigenous Relations, notably the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch, which was in Health Canada, has now been transferred to Indigenous Services. But that's a relatively minor factor explaining the increase in overall funding. I think most of the increase in funding relates to the agenda of the current government, which has made a point of increasing funding for services and programs related to Aboriginal Canadians, Indigenous Aboriginal Canadians. So that's the main factor. We could drill down into specific programs, but I think that's probably not what you want me to.
I would love to do that as an accountant, to be honest with you, but I don't think I have time for that in my 6 minutes. So let's move on a little bit. There was a fellow by the name of Ken Coates. I know we're all familiar with Ken Coates. He's a distinguished fellow and Director of Indigenous Affairs Program at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, and he's a Canada Research Chair at the Regional Innovation Department of the University of Saskatchewan. I think most of us in the room would consider him a relatively nonpartisan voice on these issues. We've had him at committee a few times representing different people here. He wrote an article in August of 2022, which was just a few months after you released a report, and his article in the context, and it was specifically in response to your report. And he said, and I quote, "Put bluntly, Canada's not getting what it's paying for." And I want to emphasize, so this is his quote still, he says, "But what's worse, the massive spending is not improving the lives of Indigenous communities." He goes on to say that Canadians believe if Canada spends billions on Indigenous affairs, it must mean that we care deeply about First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. But it does nothing of the sort. This is still the quote. While headlines emphasize dollar amounts, the statistics that tell the actual story of Indigenous well-being around employment, health, housing conditions, suicide rates, violence and imprisonment, language and culture revitalization are much more somber. When spending vast sums fails to make a substantial difference in many communities, the federal response is too often to double down and spend even more in the absence of understanding what actually works to improve the lives of Indigenous peoples. So my question is really actually quite simple. Do you agree with that assessment? I mean, he's responding to your report, and the follow-up would be, is this common to other departments, or is it unique to CERNAC and ISC?
So, in short, I would say based on the performance indicators that we have analyzed in our report last year, I would tend to agree with Mr. Coates. That seems to be consistent. What we've seen seems to be consistent with his comments, or at least what we see in terms of performance indicators does certainly do nothing to disprove his comments. Whether it's common among departments, I would say it's not common to see a level of increase of that magnitude, that is not accompanied by a significant improvement of performance indicators. What we have seen, though, is performance indicators that are attained or met about 50% of the time. That is not uncommon, but it's usually not accompanied by such a significant increase as we have seen in the area that we're studying today.
Thank you. I want to sneak one last, I think I got just a little window to sneak one last question in, right, Chair? There's an editorial, or in an editorial that was published just shortly after your report, you actually are quoted as saying that while increases in funding are well-intentioned, the Indigenous bureaucracy has had trouble matching spending increases with assessing its performance on how it spends the money. This is a little bit in follow-up to what I just said, I'm sure, but can you just flesh that out a little bit? What did you mean by that when you were quoted saying that?
I meant, if I'm remembering correctly, I meant that the government has increased spending significantly, and that's probably an understatement. But it seems difficult to have the bureaucracy spend it wisely at the same rhythm as the government intends to do that. So there seems to be a lag between the investments that are announced and made by the government and the capacity of the bureaucracy to deliver, to get results for the target populations at the same rhythm as we see the increase in funding.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. We'll now move to Mr. Aldag for 6 minutes.
Great, thank you, and thank you for being here today. When I read the report, one of the things that jumped out at me was in the conclusion where you noted, we must stress again that the differences in spending and human resources levels reported in this research were compliant with the supply process and the budget. So to me, that says that anything, although there's increased spending, it's within the allotments that have been given by the federal government. I'm also wondering, you talked about a lot of the, what were the terms, like the indicators that are reported on. How many of them are voluntary versus voluntarily set by the department, or any of them legislatively mandated? Like I had worked previously in the federal public service, and I know that some departments and agencies have things that have to be done within mandated legislative timeframes. Do either of these departments have those legislated, or are they all voluntary?
I think the majority are voluntary, but maybe Mark knows if some are legislated. I don't remember any one of them being legislated, any of the performance indicators.
Okay, so then I would think that we've also seen over the last period, I think that between 2015 and 2023 is where a lot of this work was evaluated. There's been a lot of changes, not only the splitting of the department, the adding of the Indigenous health services, but our government came in with very ambitious goals to do more on reconciliation than any government has done in the history of this country. And I think that we've heard time and time again, when I go out and meet with Indigenous communities, they say that this Liberal government has actually been the most progressive in helping advance issues that have been there since the beginning of our country. And so I think, we're seeing increased investments to try to make progress on these things. I also think that we're probably going to see some slippage in voluntary timelines, as the government says, I was, again, involved in with Parks Canada, where we had things like national park establishment, where it's really hard to have hard time frames. And I would think with these departments, where they're involved in things like land claims, reconciliation, relationship building, there's a lot of conversations, there's not hard timelines. And so you can project that we're going to have X number of land claims settled or other things done within 5 years. But if things don't come together, that's not going to happen. So there has to be flexibility, I would think, in being able to slip. The other piece, and if you want to touch base on that, I'd like to, but I also wonder about extenuating circumstances. We had COVID that hit during this time period that you've looked at. And I know that one of the conversations I often have is that our government said that within our first mandate in the 42nd Parliament, we would end all boil water advisories. There has been significant progress made on those, and again, a lot of money has been spent. But during COVID, some of the First Nations, many First Nations communities had some of the hardest lockdowns that we saw in the country, where they were saying, for the protection of our community, we do not want outside contractors coming in. And so in your report, when you get into the quantitative, did any of those kind of extenuating circumstances get looked at? Because that, I would think, would, the last 3 years that we've come through have probably caused some delays in achievement of goals, not only in these two departments, but probably across the federal public service.
And that's a good point. So we flag in our report that some of the ability to meet the departmental results indicator is more difficult when it comes to Indigenous self-determined services. So it's services that are determined by the Indigenous communities themselves. So in these areas, it's much more difficult for the departments to have control of the attainment of the targets that they set for themselves, because they're dependent in good part on the Indigenous communities themselves. So we have flagged that it's not entirely within the control of the departments to reach these targets. So
I was going to say, and if you could comment on the extenuating circumstances such as COVID, did we see the same kind of delays happening not only in these departments but other departments you've looked at because of, frankly, what the world went through over the last couple of years?
Yeah, it's an issue that obviously we all went through. So we didn't adjust some of the targets to take into account COVID. But it's understood, it's a widely known issue that we went through COVID. So depending on the specific indicators, there could be some extenuating circumstances, COVID, that could apply in some instances, but probably not in all. So it's left to the good judgment of those who read the reports to determine whether COVID is a circumstance that warrants some forgiveness for some of their indicators or not.
And I would say that, the report is very factual, but I found it to be, frankly, a bit cold. We had other things that the discovery of the missing children in Kamloops is the first example, and that has played out. And again, I don't think any Canadians should be surprised, because we've known for generations from Indigenous peoples that their children were taken and were lost, never came home. But, this was something that happened in this time period that got national attention and, again, caused more investment in resources. But also, I would think the departments paid attention to it. And I didn't see that kind of reflection in here, which is, a very tragic human story. And yet this is, very accountant kind of focused. And I would have liked to have seen some sort of narrative. Maybe you don't do that in your reports. Yeah, that was another observation on the report.
That's a very good point, sir. And I'm an economist by training, so I tend to stick to the facts to the extent possible. But that's a very valid comment.
And I'm out of time. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Aldeg. Madame Bérubé.
Thank you, Mr. Helbig. Madame Bérubé. Thank you, Chair, and I would like to thank the witnesses for being here. You mentioned in your report that there are discrepancies between real expenses, and these persist today because of structural changes in the two departments. You've also mentioned that these structural changes are not entirely responsible for these discrepancies, and these could be attributed to other factors. Could you give us more information on the reasons? Thank you very much. When I hear you quote from the report, I say to myself, yes, indeed, it merits explanation. Now, what we meant to say when we have structural discrepancy between planned amounts and amounts spent, and the same for the FTEs, the employees in departments, is that the departments put forth their budget plans at the beginning of the year, and then once the department has already prepared their plan, they then submit another report. So they have sometimes surprises and then have to inject new funds which hadn't been planned. So the government, of course, has to be very active in regard to Indigenous people. So the initial plan is often changed to take into account new priorities or additional investments that are announced in the budget or outside of the budget. For example, at the time of the fall economic estimates updates. So this is what we refer to in the report when we use that sentence which you quoted, which I would agree requires explanations. So When you say that you table a budget and then the department or government has to make adjustments, what do you take into account for the decision making? Well, that's a question the government decides. The departments issue their reports based on what they know at the time they're drafting the report and their plans, priorities, or their departmental plan. They draft those usually in January and February. Then they table them somewhere around March. Sometimes a bit later, but usually prior to the budget being tabled. And then the government discusses the budget and decides to invest additional amounts. But that hasn't been reflected in the departmental plans. Now, the criteria we used to see if there are discrepancies, we used a proportional scale. You can see whether it was very close to what was planned or, or distances from what was planned. And so we didn't have any defined criterion like 5% discrepancy, 10%. What we have is a graphic, and you find it in the report. To come back to the structural changes in the two departments, you say that discrepancy between what was planned and spent is significant. Can you explain why these poor habits and bad planning continue even after having separated the departments? You talk about the department's inability to adapt. Can you explain how that inability to adapt has financial implications? Well, perhaps I could refer to the, recurrence of the discrepancies. It has to do with the fact that the government often announces new expenditures or new investments, depending how you want to consider them, after the departments have tabled their plans. So those are questions that the departments would be in a better position to answer. Why? Because the departments are not aware when they table their plan of all of the resources they're going to have during the course of the year. Regarding the second part of your question, could you remind me? The adaptation and the impacts. Well, the impact it has is it makes it difficult for departments to turn in a dime when they, get the injections of additional funds. They don't seem to have a good capacity to adapt quickly to injections of new funds and the new priorities imposed on them or what is asked of them by government. Sorry, apologize. Despite previous years, there's no adapting occurring? No, there is, but not at the same pace as funds have been injected. As was mentioned earlier, there have been lots of investments with regard to Indigenous peoples, but these investments seem to not be too many for the departments to keep up.
Merci, Madame Bérubé.
Thank you, Ms. Bérubé.
You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here as well. And I understand that I'm not a permanent member of this committee, but I do respect the PBO's work and, of course, the work that you've done to prepare this analysis. And so it's quite clear by the comments by many of the colleagues around the table that there seems to be a clear discrepancy, at least in your perspective, between the amount of the government's spending and the actual ability for the government to get those priorities done. And you just mentioned in some ways that the priorities are continuous in the sense that year after year we see this increase in the priorities of the government to help Indigenous people often, but we also see the finances that are required to do that, but there isn't the actual capability, whether it's in full-time employees or in other means. Did your report in some ways look at aspects outside of just the amount of people that are necessary to get this done? Is there an issue in terms of how the actual maybe division of the ministry played a role in actually slowing down how these priorities could be monitored or even completed?
It's certainly an issue, the fact that the department formerly known as Aboriginal Affairs was split into two, and then there was some other parts of other departments that were attached or merged with Indigenous Services Canada. That certainly played a role. When there's a major reorganization like that, it tends to consume quite a bit of energy internally, senior management energy, which is diverted from delivering on the core mandate. So it certainly is one factor.
That. So you recognize that that had a lasting impact. And would you say that that lasting impact from the time the ministry was divided to today continues to have an impact on the priorities?
Our report was tabled last year, so I cannot speak about today, but it seems to still have some remaining leftover impacts, even when we tabled the report. So last year, because some of the performance indicators were still not being met. That being said, it could be to other factors than just the reorganization. Mr. Aldag mentioned COVID, which is a very good point, and there could be other extenuating circumstances, but there seems to still be issues resulting from the reorganization.
And these issues, I imagine, would continue then to have, you mentioned in your report that these issues persist. And if those issues continue to persist in terms of organizational and management being unable to continue to have the ability to do the work it's been assigned, but then to continue to do the work, the additional work that's there, there's going to continue to be a gap. Don't you agree?
I think the likelihood of there continuing to be a gap is there. It's not insignificant.
Suffers that delay.
Well,
who suffers the most, you think?
It's obviously the recipient of these services, those who expect to get these services and are in need of these services. So
I sat on the Public Accounts. I sit on the Public Accounts Committee, and I've seen in your references you speak of a report that we had, Report 5, which is the social economic gaps on First Nations reserves. And when we did that study, of course, and to the benefit of my colleagues here, I'd hope, we actually were able to determine that there was a funding gap. And your report, I know, suggests that there was funding increases, but not all funding increases are particular to the issues that are pertaining to Indigenous people. One of those, for example, something that's a big issue in my province of Alberta is forest fires. We studied, for example, the First Nations Emergency Management, which is governed by ISC. We brought in the Deputy Minister. We talked to many of those folks, and we asked them clearly important questions. But why is it that the government had only assigned $12 million, for example, to fire prevention or natural disaster prevention across the entire country? Just $12 million. And when I asked the Deputy Minister, how much is it going to cost to actually see the level of preparedness, she reluctantly admitted that it was in the mark of $360 to $500 million. And so we do see that, of course, the amount of money here is increasing in these total portfolios, but is it being targeted in the most appropriate way, the way that would actually see the kind of programs that would ensure that longer issues that can be stopped, for example, can stop today? Did you go through, for example, the department's planning on individual issues?
Not on every single one of them. We did reports, however, on access to water and wastewater treatment plants. We also did reports on housing for Aboriginal people, and we found that for water and wastewater systems, there was sufficient funding for capital spending, but not enough, clearly not enough for operational spending. When it comes to housing, we found that there was a funding gap to meet the needs of people on and off reserve. So we didn't look at every single one of the components in the Aboriginal Affairs portfolio, but we looked at a few of them under separate reports.
It's fair to say it's a mixed bag.
Yes.
Some areas are underfunded, like emergency management preparedness for First Nations that are experiencing natural disaster, like in my province of Alberta, versus, for example, Clean Water Initiative, which is a different standard of complexities. And so it's not fair, I think, completely to say that the government is spending a lot, but I think to the Conservatives' point as well, they often say this. There's a lot of spending, but not enough results. But I don't know if that's exactly the same truth. I think I would disagree with the Conservatives on that point, but I would agree that there seems to be outcome issues. And so although the amount of money that's there is appropriate, let's say, I'll agree with you on that in some respect, the areas to which that investment is targeted is not appropriate. And we see that when we see $12 million for natural resource protections across First Nations, while at the same time seeing massive investments in some areas that could, this is just my now partisan position, limit the government's liability on certain issues. So I
Thank
want
you
to
very
ask
much,
you to
Mr.
comment on
Desjardins.
that.
We'll have to move on
But
to our
thank
second
you.
round. We will go to Mr. Vidal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to move on, and this will actually follow up on Mr. Desjardins' comments, I think, a little bit. I want to move on to the qualitative stuff. I told you I wanted to talk quantitative. We could do that for a long time, but let's move on because we only have so many slots tonight. The qualitative component focuses on the departmental results indicators, the DRIs, as you abbreviate them. These indicators are used to evaluate progress towards its goals. That's the whole purpose of this kind of management system. I've been part of that in my past. You do go on to explain some of the reasons, and you talked about some of these are more difficult to achieve and whatever because of circumstances. But you also say that even if these components are excluded, ISC in particular falls very short of its ability to specify and maintain targets. That's a clear conclusion you make. I'm going to come back to Mr. Coates again, and again, a quote from his article. He says, the government can and does change up targets and metrics, making it difficult to determine actual outcomes. But given the vast expenditure, such a conclusion is tragic. This goes exactly to what Mr. Desjardins is saying. It's about getting outcomes for the investments we're making. And so I'm just curious about your comment to Mr. Coates' conclusion in this particular aspect, relative to the qualitative component.
Well, I've commented before in general, and I can be a bit more specific here. Departments can set their own departmental indicators. They can set their own targets. So it's surprising to see that out of 20, only 4 were reached in 22-23 by Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, like the mix of the two. So if a department can set its own performance indicators and its own targets, it's surprising that they cannot meet more than 50% of them. So I agree with Mr. Coates. There seems to be an outcome problem.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. You've already answered one of my later questions, so I'm going to go a different angle now because that's exactly where I was going to go. But I have to be honest with you, when I read your report, the image I had of your report, and I'm not sure if you're a sports fan or not, but if you go to a sports game and you see the Tim Hortons game where they put a marble under a cup, and then you have to move the cups around and you have to follow the marble, and hopefully if you can keep track of the marble, you actually win a prize at the end of the day. That's the image I had of what's going on here. It seems to me like there's an accountability issue and that outcomes and accountability are minimized by having the targets and the goals constantly changing, or the time frames, or many of them set as to be determined years down the road still. It's like it's a sleight of hand game. And I have to be honest, I was the chairman of a board that we had that same issue internally with our own management system, and we had to call that out. So do you think there's an accountability issue that's created by these moving, changing targets that aren't consistent and there's nothing to shoot for if you don't keep the targets and you don't actually have the targets determined yet?
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's done on purpose. I think public servants who come up with these indicators genuinely mean to have the best indicators, but changing them regularly or frequently does not help for accountability and accountability purposes to track a departmental performance over time.
So one last question for you. I think I have about a minute and a half, so we'll be good here. Mr. Desjardins and I sat at Public Accounts one day, and we had an Auditor General's report on emergency management services, I think, if we remember that. So we've had numerous Auditor General reports. We've had numerous reports from your office. We talk to people on the ground. All of us talk to people in the communities, and there's this conclusion that some of these things are not working. They're not working at the ground to improve the lives of people. And so we need to find a way to fix that. But yet when we get the ministers and department officials here, they don't take responsibility for this lack of accountability, and instead they double down. And from my seat, it's like everybody sees that there's a problem here, but we won't acknowledge it. We won't take responsibility for it. And I would suggest to you, sir, that truth and reconciliation begins with accepting the truth. So would you agree with my conclusion that in order to bring about effective change, the minister and the top officials of these departments must be willing to accept the truth of some of the challenges that you so clearly portray in your report?
It's hard to disagree with that.
Really quick answer. I think I'm just about out of time anyways, Chair, right?
Yes, thank you
Thank
very
you
much,
for that.
Mr. Vidal. We'll go to Mr. Poloski for 5 minutes.
I didn't know it was me, but okay. I'm still trying to get my. I'll take your time. Good. You're helping me to waste my 5 minutes, so I don't have to actually ask a question. I'm trying to get my mind around what you did here, because you start off by saying that the analysis conducted indicates that the increased spending did not result in a commensurate improvement in the ability of these organizations to achieve the goals that they set for themselves. And by the goals, you mean the department result indicators, right? But and it seems to me like what you're doing is you have a bunch of these targets set up there, and you're counting how many times the government hit those targets, right? Am I right? But some of the times, you actually didn't shoot at the target because you took it down beforehand. You decided beforehand that that wasn't going to be a target, right? And then on the other hand, you've put up other targets that you haven't had a chance yet to count, right? So I'm not sure the significance of this in this conclusion that that the government is inefficient, we're spending more when we're not hitting the targets, when it seems like that it's random. We didn't actually start off with these targets and shot at these targets. Am I wrong with that?
That's one of the issues that we have flagged. So targets changed over time. There are also issues where we identify that the goal, or the DRI, the Departmental Result Indicator, has a target and a date to complete, but that's changed compared to the previous year. So the department changed the timeline for completing or reaching the goal. There are also issues where there's a target, but there's no timeline to reach it. So we aim for this, but we don't have a timeline to reach that. So there are different issues, but the one you identified is certainly one of them.
So now, when there actually was a target in a timeline and the target didn't change over the time, how did the government do with respect to hitting those targets?
It varied depending on the year. So it goes from 9 out of 24 in 2018-19 to 4 out of 14 in 2022-23. And Mark can correct me or kick me under the table if I'm wrong.
The targets that remained stable, so you couldn't say that this was a new target or an old target.
By and large.
Okay, and I looked at your report and I couldn't see what actually are the targets and how did they change over the period of time.
So we didn't want to have a very long report by listing each and every one of them. So instead, we made reference to the departmental results reports or the departmental publications, and they're referenced at the end of the report in the notes, I think. Yeah.
Can you just tell me some of the more significant targets? I mean, just looking through the actual body of, I'm not sure exactly what kind of targets we're talking about here.
Off memory, I think we were talking targets such as the number of housing built or the number of reserves without a boil and water advisory. So I'd have to go back to the list to refresh my memory. It's a report
And
we did a year ago.
when you look at how the department changed the targets, can you comment on what seems to be the reasoning behind the changing of the targets? Because perhaps over a period of time, the government's goals have changed. Perhaps we've realized that we ought to emphasize different things, that perhaps things we were measuring didn't really accurately reflect what we wanted it to reflect. So can you comment on those changing nature of those targets?
I probably would need to go back and look at which one specifically, but that's also a good question for ministers. They would be in a better position to determine why some targets changed. I can have an indication. I can provide the committee with a list of which ones did change, but the reasons will be a bit more difficult for me to explain. I think the minister or senior officials would be in a better position.
Can you explain, you say at some point, Indigenous self-determined services do not have targets specified for them. What does that mean?
Yeah, Thank you for the question. I think for that point, it really depends on how long it takes to settle the claim or to become self-governing. So for that DRI, yes, it would be difficult to set a target.
Thank you, Mr. Pileski. Madame Béruvé, 2 minutes et demi.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to bring you back to this notion of the public service having to adapt. You mentioned that public service had difficulties coming through, but if you read the report, there were years when resources were low. Were you able to identify reasons why departments keep their staffing low? I believe that would be related to hiring and retention of personnel. That type of expertise is in demand, certainly in the health and social services sector, economic development. Now, the two departments have no doubt challenges when it comes to rehiring and recruitment of the staff that can deliver the services given the wide range of services. And then there is the issue of retaining key staff. Those could be two good reasons. I don't have the specific reasons, and those would be very good questions to ask of the departments when they appear before you. In my reading of the report, my impression is that there's two departments that are increasing their expenses while lowering their staffing. Now, do you think that harmonizing the number of staff with the projects would be helpful? Would that enable departments to deliver on their objectives? I think you raise a good point. The investments, the additional expenditures over the years, the injections of funds in those two departments have made the task difficult for those two departments to plan well for their human resources needs. If at the beginning of the year they plan that their funding is going to be of a certain $1 million, but then there's an announcement or where they get additional funding, it can change completely or significantly their human resources plan. So the addition of funds over the years makes planning more difficult because departments are constantly in hiring mode to replace those who are leaving, but also to deliver the new merchandise as the departments get this new money, either through the budget or these departments are always seeking new human resources to be able to deliver the merchandise.
You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And my friends, unfortunately, this is my last round. They're bringing the big guns. The honourable member from Nunavut has returned, and so I'll have to depart after this. But before I do, to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, I do want to make more clear my point in relation to the important difference between what your report says and what the Indigenous Service Ministry or the Crown Indigenous Relations is doing. I want to be clear that although there are significant investments that have been made, those targets within the ministry itself have not been allocated. We just previously talked about that, have not been allocated to all of the areas to which Indigenous people would actually derive benefit from. We talked about emergency management, $12 million. Even though there's a bunch of money elsewhere, there's $12 million to tackle climate change for Indigenous communities. It's critically underfunded. I do now want to move, just after reinforcing that point, to the issue you just mentioned on the immense lack of human resources. It's no secret that this work is difficult. It's no secret that in the age of reconciliation, it was mentioned by our Conservative colleagues, that truth is a big part of that. Well, first of all, it's a human resource emergency that is facing Indigenous Services Canada and Crown Indigenous Relations that is having a disproportionate impact, a direct impact on the lived experiences of Indigenous people, whether it's housing, whether it was COVID that was mentioned, or whether it's the existing lack of funding for prevention for climate mitigation. There's issues that are critical to the social economic outcome that we're still seeing in Indigenous communities. And so in your recommendation, in some ways, beyond human resource issues, is it fair to say that when it comes to the process of the government requesting finances, that they actually do it in a way that they request that in light of they do that request in light of the human resource need? So, for example, when you mentioned in the cycle, you said they did the parliamentary budget cycle fine, that they went to the ministry reported what they needed, but was unable to actually deliver those things. Do you think, in your review of those documents, did they cite the actual human resource need in a way that would be in recognition to the actual immense emergency that's facing human resource challenges in the ministries?
We use publicly available data, so HR was not explicitly mentioned in these publicly available data. And when we released a report last year, I'm not aware that the departments reached out to us and specifically mentioned that they were, like, HR was the number one issues they were faced with. It is one of the issues they're faced with, but they didn't mention, they didn't berate us for mentioning HR or flagging that as inaccurate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Desjardins. And we will go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you once again, Mr. Giroux, for attending INAN. My questions are going to be about Arctic sovereignty, and I spoke to you earlier about your report that's on the 2%. I have it here in front of me, Canada's military expenditure and the NATO 2% spending target. So that's what I'll be referring to. But for context, I'm going to read an article because I've spoken with a lot of people from the territories in Nunavut that are very concerned about the Arctic threat of Putin and other nations that see Arctic as an area that to possibly challenge Canada and its sovereignty on. So from a Reuters article, January 27, 2023, Putin discusses Russia claim to giant chunk of Arctic Ocean seabed. Moscow. President Vladimir Putin held talks on Friday with top security officials about the status of Russia's efforts to legally expand the outer boundaries of its continental shelf in the Arctic Ocean. Moscow said at the time it wanted much more Arctic seabed, a move that has implications for Canada, Denmark, who also have their own claims. Russia's neighbors in the Arctic have become increasingly concerned about Moscow's ambitions in the strategically important region since it sent tens of thousands of troops into Ukraine in February last year. And it goes without saying that that Russia is currently on the move. And where are they going to go next, I think, is the next question. And in your testimony today, you've talked about already, we've heard it from various members here, the outcomes for this government are a problem. And it's often we see it as money thrown at things but don't necessarily land, or outcomes aren't measured, or as we just spoke about, there's not even a dartboard to throw the dart at. There's no target to even hit. So it brings up a leak that came out of the Pentagon. I was at the Pentagon a few weeks ago, and it brings up this, the leak that the Prime Minister said he's never going to meet the target. And from the Washington Post, Trudeau told NATO that Canada will never meet its spending goal, is a quote. Germany is concerned, Turkey is disappointed. Well, it appears by your report that it's in plain sight, too, that this promise to never meet the goal. I'm just concerned about how kind of lower than even this threshold actually is. So from your report on page 4, it says military expenditure as a percentage of GDP currently is at 2022-2023, 1.33%. Next year is 1.46%. Next year is 1.51%. Next year, 1.54%. Next year, 1.59%. The problem with that is that's what the promise is. But and I'll refer you to the estimates where we've discovered it, because again, one thing that the northern communities are concerned about is NORAD, and the NORAD modernization promise was big, a lot of fanfare, $4.9 billion. But this is what was in the estimate. So funding for North American Aerospace Defense Command modernization and Canadian Armed Forces communications capabilities, the promise was $4.9 billion. The actual expenditure is $45,357,526. So you talk about an outcome not being realized. You know, billions needed and millions getting spent, and it's to analyze the situation. My question for you is, does the PM's record on military spending give you confidence that spending on Arctic sovereignty and security is on track?
When we did that report, we did that after Russia invaded Ukraine, and there were lots of questions about the NATO target of hitting 2% of GDP allocated to national defense. So we looked at the plans, the current plans, or the plans that were known at that time for military expenditures, and we found that there's a gap of between $13 and $18 billion per year for Canada to meet the 2% NATO target. So I can't comment specifically on one area of spending because I'm not a military expert, but there is a gap between the spending plan and the 2% target.
And thank you for that. I have 30 seconds left, but I'll refer to the Auditor General's report on Arctic water surveillance. And in the conclusion, it said, we concluded that the federal organizations we audited, and I can go through them, had not taken the action required to build the maritime domain awareness they collectively needed to respond to safety and security risks associated with increasing vessel traffic in Arctic
point
waters.
of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Aldag?
I'm just trying to understand. This is fascinating, but I call the question on relevance to the hearing that we're doing today.
Yeah.
We've invited the Parliamentary Budget Officer here. Specifically, the notice of the meeting says on the research and comparative analysis on the estimates of the Department of Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs and the Department of Indigenous Services. We're not here to talk about the Prime Minister's spending on defense and other things. Arctic sovereignty, if it's framed within the context of the study, but I'm not seeing any relevance. I'm just wondering if you could give us a ruling on this, because I know there's not a lot of time left.
Can I hopefully I still have a little bit of time from that?
You've got about 5 seconds on your time, but you can reply to that if you'd like.
Yeah, well, I was in the midst of making a comment, and then I had 15 seconds left on my clock when I was asked. I mean, the relevance is there. I asked the Parliamentary Budget Officer when I came in if I could refer to his report on 2% NATO spending. My role in the Indigenous Northern Affairs Committee is a Northern Affairs, Arctic Sovereignty, and Northern Economic Development. It's very relevant to the people of the North, and very relevant even to the Parliamentary Budget Officer that's sitting at the end of the table. So I think it is relevant.
Fair enough. I'll give you your 15 seconds. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'll just finish with this. Furthermore, the existing satellite services and infrastructure did not provide the capacity that the federal organizations needed to perform surveillance of Arctic waters. Delays in the renewal of satellite ships and aircraft risk compromising the presence of these organizations in Arctic waters. And I think this is, again, one of those outcomes that we need to see realized for our own sovereignty and security.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. We'll now move on to Mr. McLeod for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the PBO for appearing and talking to us today. I'm trying to follow on how the report affects or includes the North. I'm the member for the Northwest Territories, and I'm trying to find out. I'd like to know how you compile you put your report together based on what information, especially what information do you gather from the North? Do you include the Indigenous communities in the North? My first question.
Thank you. So I'll ask Mark to respond to your question because he was much more closely involved in the drafting of the report.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We used 2 sources of information for the report. The first source was the government's OpenGov data source, which is online. The second source were the departmental plans of the 2 departments. So those were the 2 sources we used. We looked at the core responsibility for each department. So we didn't actually look at programs specifically for those in the North. We were looking at the high-level core responsibility for the quantitative, and for the qualitative, we looked at the DRIs.
So could I, let me just interrupt you. So is it possible that your information does not include the North? We have 3 territories with almost every territory has majority Indigenous, but we don't fit in a clear definition that the department has been using historically. It's only been since the Liberal government got elected that the North has been getting attention through Indigenous affairs, Indigenous services, and Northern affairs. So is it possible that the North is left out in your information?
The only scenario under which the North would have been left out of our report would be if both departments, did not include anything related to the North, which would be very surprising given that it's an important part of their mandate. But if they did not include anything related to the North, then our report would not include the North. But my understanding is that it did include, like the information they provided did include the North.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the information because we have Indigenous communities, but they're not reserves; they're public communities. But we do have two reserves. Then we got settled claims, then unsettled claims. We have Métis, and then we have Denin, and we have Inuvialuit. My second question is regarding the delivery of services. You know, in 2014, the Conservative government of the day cut significant amount of funding to Indigenous people. That included band councils, tribal councils, but it also included the Department of Indian Affairs, and which was just one department at that time. And I'm finding, as a person that's Indigenous, first of all, but has strong relationships with Indigenous governments, that they never really recovered, and the department never really recovered. And so delivery of programs is really challenging because they don't have the resources. Even in negotiating land claims and self-governance, we have negotiators handling many files and only being able to allot a day and a half of negotiations per month per file. And, we have 15 claims in the Northwest Territories. So are you finding that some of the challenge for delivery is coming from the department being under-resourced? I know the Finance Committee had made recommendations because they found in their studies that Indian Affairs wasn't resourced adequately to be able to deliver the programs to even meet some of the challenges in terms of bridging the gaps.
So we looked at the departmental funding and human resources at an aggregate level. So I cannot speak as to whether they are appropriately resourced in specific areas such as self-government negotiations.
But you're saying they're under-delivering, so you should be able to see what is some of the causes of on some of the challenges they're facing.
It's quite clear that they cannot always deliver and use all of the funding that they are being allocated, in good part because it's difficult for them to recruit commensurately with the additional funding they're getting. As to whether or not they have recovered from previous expenditure restraint or cuts exercises, that's a good question for ministers.
True.
Oh, thank you, Mr. McLeod. You're out of time. We'll have to go to Mr. Melillo for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you once again to our Parliamentary Budget Officer for being here today. Lots of great conversations so far. I mean, part of the problem going this late in the round is that a lot of people have asked similar questions that I would like to ask, but I'll just try to flesh out some more details on some of the things that have been touched on already. And I'll start with the note in your report that says that ISC was less able to set a target when it comes to the DRIs. I know Mr. Vidal mentioned this as well. It seems that Indigenous Services Canada specifically has had more trouble setting a target and meeting its target, and I think you spoke to a few of the reasons why, in terms of the reorganization of the department and some of the new duties that it was assigned. You also mentioned, I believe this isn't an exact quote, but you said something along the lines earlier of the bureaucracy not having the capacity to handle some of those changes. I'm just wondering if you could speak into greater detail and provide some greater context for us on the challenges in ISC specifically when it comes to setting and meeting those targets. So
Indigenous Services was created when the department, formerly known as Aboriginal Affairs, was split into two: the Crown Indigenous Relations on the one hand and the Indigenous Services Group on the one hand, and that was also merged with First Nations and Inuit Health Branch at Health Canada, which is what a former Minister of Aboriginal Affairs used to call the 11th province of Canada, which is, I think, a good depiction of what it is. It's providing economic services, social services, education, health, childhood protection, and so on to individuals and communities spread across the country. So it's understandable that when a major reorganization like that, being split from a department being split into two, and then merger of branches into that new entity, there could be some adjustments needed. And I think in good part, the difficulty in meeting targets or setting targets has arisen because of that, but also because of the more ambitious or the new priorities or the priorities of the government, which resulted in an increase of resources to these two newly created entities.
I'd like to stop you there, and I do have limited time, so please forgive me. But you mentioned that increase in resources, and obviously the current government since 2015 has spent a lot of money on a lot of different things. They've definitely increased spending a lot more than the previous government before. But what is it, I guess the question I would have is how does ISC compare to other departments in the government that have also seen an increase in resources, but not necessarily and hopefully not the same sort of results in terms of not getting the increase in the commensurate increase in outcomes. So what is it specifically in ISC that from your findings that has led to that breakdown?
It's hard to tell because ISC has seen a significant increase in its resources, as you mentioned, but the majority of departments have a similar record when it comes to meeting their targets under their departmental results indicators. So it's a case where a department has benefited from a significant increase in its funding, but the attainment or the targets have not been bettered or have not been met more often than in other departments that have not benefited from the same level of increase.
Thank you. And just quickly with the minute I have left, it was mentioned as well. I don't remember by which one of my colleagues, but obviously there's an increase in resources towards Indigenous services under this government. But there's also been instances where, and again to quote, that ISC tended to spend more than what they initially planned and required more human resources than expected. I've got maybe about 30 seconds now. Could you speak to that in more depth, what you meant by that?
Sure. It's a reference to the fact that the departments had additional resources that were provided to them after they prepared and tabled their departmental plans. So that's why they spent more than initially planned. As Mr. Aldag alluded to, it's through no misgiving or not anything untowards happening in departments. It's additional resources that were provided to them after the start of the fiscal year.
Thank you very much, Mr. Melillo. We'll now go to Mr. Badaway for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess just a comment before a question. There's no mention of the First Nations and Inuit Health Services being moved from Health Canada to ISC. Would you not think that it would be important to note that in your report because of the fluidity that happened, especially during COVID?
I thought it had been mentioned somewhere in the report, but maybe it isn't. So if it isn't, my apologies. But I thought we described the changes that took place in the one department that was then split into two, and the merger of First Nations and Inuit Health Branch. But again, it's a report that we tabled a year ago, so I read it again today. I thought it was mentioned.
Okay, thank you. I didn't see it in there, but we'll move past that. I guess the difference today compared to pre-2015 under the Conservative government is that we have worked with Indigenous communities shoulder to shoulder to establish, as you mentioned earlier, bold, ambitious plans that is, quite frankly, transforming services and most importantly, is to be self-determined. And I want to get back to that in a second. Meeting in partnership with Indigenous leaders, legacy programs, working to close the gaps for both infrastructure and services like education and healthcare, and is developing more pathways for self-determination, which once again is very important. So I guess my question would be, would you agree that once the departments have been merged, as they have been, a major merger, as was mentioned earlier, adjustments and moving forward in an ambitious manner, as we have since 2015, and of course the dollars needed to reach community expectations is sometimes not expected to happen overnight. It's going to take some time. Would you agree that it's very important to put that discipline structure in place with the communities? And what I mean by that is to be more disciplined in terms of community planning, official planning, secondary planning, to make sure that infrastructure capacity attaches to the official planning. When you look at infrastructure, you look at healthcare, you look at education, you look at housing, and the list goes on. One, would you agree it's going to take some time? Two, would you agree that self-determination is important while doing that? And lastly, in terms of the costs attached to it, that of course it's a lot of money. Nothing was done prior to 15, and we're taking on an ambitious plan here. So ultimately, do you agree that's going to take some time?
Well, as I mentioned before, I think the area of Indigenous services is akin to running Canada's 11th province. Depending on its size, we can argue about that, but it's providing the full gambit of programs to communities that are scattered across the country. So does that take time? It definitely takes time and a lot of resources. So no doubt about that. Before being PBO, I worked notably at the Department of Finance, but I still have qualities, I promise. And I worked on areas of self-determination and Indigenous services. And from that experience, I can say that self-determination is an important aspect of enabling First Nation communities to have better outcomes. But from these years at finance, it takes a lot of time and energy to do it right. So I agree with you on that, totally.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew. And I guess another question I want to add to the mix, because let's face it, to some extent this is bigger than the country, especially because nothing's been done for over 200 years. And to the extent of what we're doing now, this is trailblazing. And here we are now taking on a big bite and working with these communities. But equally as important is not what we're going to have and invest in. It's also what we have from the past. And I shouldn't say we, they, these communities. So what's equally as important is not just what we're investing in new, what's also important is what we have to invest in to manage the assets that exist. It could be buildings, it could be pipes in the ground, it could be water, sewer, treatment plants, distribution lines, it could be roads, sidewalks, facilities, and the list goes on. Schools, healthcare centers, and again, the list goes on and on and on. So with that said, do you find it equally as important under that discipline structure that I referred to earlier to not only worry about and invest in and work with these communities to then ensure that they have what they need in the future, but also to manage the assets that they have now from the past in terms of their legacy?
I don't think I can dispute that.
And with the cost of that, once again, I go back to my original question, it's going to take some time.
Definitely, and that's why I think it's important to have indicators that can track progress over time so that Canadians can know that the government is going in the right direction or that the outcomes that are expected are being realized.
But again, that's going to take time as well.
Thank you, Mr. Badoué. Madame Badoué?
Thank you, Mr. Drew.
2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Were you able to study the amounts spent by the departments? And was everything that was budget actually earmarked for the years you studied? If additional sums were added, and it's noted that the public service has difficulty carrying through, this is a question we consider each year end, or at least when the books for a year are given to us, and we see that each year there are departments, especially the very large departments with very big budgets. For example, CRNAC and ISC, those two departments often have funds that have been given them, but they have not been spent. Why? Because over the months of that financial year, they simply have not been able to spend the entirety of their budget, which is not unusual. I mean, departments are reprimanded severely if they spend more than their budget. And all managers, of course, manage very rigorously. But when you have departments taking care of Indigenous services, you tend to have larger amounts than what you see elsewhere because the initial size of their budget is considerable. So yes, it is a recurrent fact year after year. In the report, you mentioned that it is difficult to attain objectives when it comes to self-determined services. Is there an explanation you could provide as to the reasons for those difficulties? These would be services whose delivery depend on the communities themselves. The departments have relatively little control over this, so the targets, what the department wants to attain, depends on the execution of third parties. That is, the Indigenous communities, of which there are many spread across the country. So with these indicators, it's very difficult for the department to control year after year the capacity of attaining the targets because it depends on the community's ability to deliver. And of course, communities have very different problems. Do you have any numbers? To date, we don't have that data in what we consulted, but when the department appears before you later this week, they'll no doubt give you details.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's strange to speak English in this room when I'm with you people. Which makes me appreciate my interpreter, which couldn't appear today, even more. Anyway, thank you so much for appearing before our committee and looking into what you did based on a motion that was passed by this committee. I wanted to direct my questions regarding a statement that you have on page 15. In quotes, it says, INAC and Health Canada exhibited a capacity to achieve the objectives that it had set for themselves. So you noted that they have the capacity to set objectives and to meet them. But then you also report that there's been failures for them to meet these targets because they keep either keep asking for not enough, or they keep moving the target. So no wonder they're struggling to meet their targets if they keep having a moving target all these many years. So you end up saying that in your report that they've performed, in quotes, performed poorly at specifying and maintaining a given objectives. So I wanted to ask some questions about those performances, and if you could explain what explains, first of all, this poor performance, if you could describe that a little bit.
So it's difficult to determine exactly what explains that poor performance at maintaining the same performance targets. It could be changing priorities, so the departments being subject to priorities that change. So if that's the case, they have to change the performance indicators that they track. Or it could be a realization that the targets they have are not appropriate to get to the desired outcomes. But it's difficult for us to determine that, having just looked at the departmental results indicators, the targets themselves, and not having not conducting a thorough study about why they chose these specific targets and why they changed. So we looked at their tracking of targets and the fact that some of them changed, but we did not encounter, or we did not start the study with a view of getting full-fledged explanations.
Thank you, Ms. Sidlow. I just want to check with our witnesses as well. You're doing okay? You've been going on the hot seat now for quite a long time. Do you need a break or anything, or you're...
That's very nice of you to ask, but I'm good, so
Okay.
Mark is good too.
Thank you. We'll proceed now to Mr. Schmale for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you to our witnesses. A very interesting conversation indeed. I want to pick up where Ms. Sidlow left off, and that is in the indicators area about how we've seen in departmental plans year after year through successive years, kind of targets in certain areas where if it wasn't met, the deadline for completion was just pushed away and pushed away. I missed the first little bit. Is this something unique to this department that you're seeing these benchmarks being pushed on, or is this kind of isolated to these two departments in your experience?
It is widespread across the public service, sadly.
Despite the increase in funding that this department has received?
It's irrespective of funding that departments receive. In addition or stable funding, it is virtually, I can't say it's all organizations, but it's widespread.
So could it have more to do with the process, especially when you're, yes, okay, perfect. Especially when you have communities applying for endless program funding and the applications being taken in Ottawa kind of goes around the cotton candy machine and then dispersed out. Could there be efficiencies found in maybe ISC or others in terms of more direct decision-making power? This is more policy than anything, but the point is where you're giving, it's more of a bottom-up, not top-down approach to dealing with Indigenous communities, or really anything, I guess.
Well, I think the issue of departmental results indicators moving from year to year is clearly not unique to these two departments. It's, as I said, it's widespread. How to fix that? That's a good question. I think it's up to ministers to set targets and try to make their officials stick to them. There's a committee of officials, of ministers, the Treasury Board, and I think these ministers are empowered to impose targets on departments and force them to stick to them, and have them explain why they can't meet certain targets. It certainly would be an improvement from the process where these targets and these indicators themselves are determined by officials and almost imposed on ministers who have not the right tools to challenge these and can easily suggest changes from year to year. It's a topic I've raised before, and I'm not making any friends in the public service when I make these comments, but I'm here to tell you what I think when you ask me, and that's exactly what I'm doing again today, losing probably the only two friends I had left.
Well, I'm sure everyone at this table calls you a friend as well. So I guess when you're talking about the mechanics of big government, right? When you have big government, it's hard to have kind of big freedom, so to speak. The ability to move quickly on certain topics or certain priorities is very difficult. It's a big boat to move, right? So to your point, I guess there could be, rather than talking about endless program funding, and endless feeding of this machine, there could be a better way where tax dollars have more velocity by giving it to the community, having them decide what priorities there are, rather than having this back and forth between Ottawa and the Indigenous communities, or non-Indigenous communities, really, if it's not this department, another department.
Probably a very good point. I think the government is relatively good at doing stuff routinely, despite what people may think. It struggles when it's asked to do something different quickly. That's where we tend to hit a wall. So if you ask officials to do the same thing over and over again, they tend to get very good at it. However, when it comes to providing services to Indigenous Canadians, it's not routine, same thing day in, day out. Different people have different needs, and that's probably where the rubber hits the road.
Okay. Which goes to the quote, I think it was Reagan who said it, the closest thing to life on Earth was a government program. And that pretty much explains that.
No comment.
Once it's in, it's hard to get out because it's there forever. Okay, well, that I understand. How much time do I have? 20 seconds. Okay. I don't think I can get into anything in 20 seconds. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schmale. We'll now go to Mr. Weiler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd also like to thank our witnesses, in particular Mr. Giroux, for being here and for his report on this and other topics are always really, really important for the work that we do. I want to pick up on a line of questioning that Mr. Schmale brought up, and I may look at it maybe a little bit less than a libertarian point of view than he does. But I know particularly from speaking to some of my good friends that work in urban planning and do a lot of work with First Nations right across the country. One of the big barriers for accessing government funding is some of the long application processes that are put together for many of these programs. And oftentimes many nations not having the capacity or sometimes even the knowledge of those programs that are coming up. And so I'm wondering if in the process of putting together your report, if this is something that came up and if you see something like that as impacting perhaps some of the results that are being realized from the work in ISK and CERNA.
Thing that came up when we put together our report, but it's something that comes up almost every time we look at specific government programs. And the reason tends generally to be that governments, every department wants to have a level of certainty that what they are, when they're designing a program, they want to ensure that the recipients are the intended recipients and that nothing goes wrong once the money is out the door. So they tend to have an application process that screens out as much as possible applicants that are not eligible, and then they tend to have accountability issues and accountability issues. So they want to know what was achieved with the money that they provided. So it tends to be burdensome for the applicants, and that's not specific to the federal government. It's very common to other levels of government. So it's a struggle between giving money in a seamless and efficient way, but also ensuring that the money is not wasted on ineligible recipients, and that there's also some accountability as to what the money was used for, so that the government can account for that and get results.
Thank you. In report, you note that, quote, our analysis determined that the number of performance indicators increased after ISK and CERNAC were created, and quote that the analysis conducted indicates that the increased spending did not result in commensurate improvement of the ability of these organizations to achieve the goals that they had set for themselves. So, I think there's a few things that can be taken from that. And I'm wondering if you can maybe just explain to this committee, what degree is this not actually making progress in making improvements on the ground? Or how much of that is just not reaching what you judge to be much higher goals that these departments are setting than were set in these plans from before?
I don't think that departments set much higher goals over time. They probably have increased their ambition, but that's not what struck us as being the main issue when the government departments failed to meet some of their targets. I think it has more to do with just a lack of capacity to generally meet the targets that they had set for themselves, but not because they had a very ambitious agenda. It didn't strike me, and again, Mark can correct me if it's not the case because he was closer to some of the details of the report, but I think it was a general lack of capacity to deliver on all of these programs rather than targets that were set at too high a level at the outset. He's nodding, so that's a good sign.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Well, next question. You mentioned in your report that there that settlements were a big part of the overtures in spending. And you also mentioned that several department programs increased as a result of provisions that were made by the federal government, and this explains the difference between the planned and actual results, both in spending and human resources. So I was hoping if you could maybe speak a little bit more to that and how it's reflected in the conclusions of the study, particularly on the settlement side.
So I'm not sure if we have all the data at a granular level, but it's clear that settlements and money set aside and provided to departments for settlements constitutes a good part of the increased spending. So, but beyond that, I'm not sure I can comment without getting into very specific or before or without asking you for more specific aspects to your question.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weiler. We're now going to go to a condensed fourth round. So we'll begin with Mr. Vidal for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to thank you again for all your work on this. And I'm going to go back to a couple of things you said earlier, but also you referred to this in the editorial that I talked about earlier that you were quoted in. You told AP10 News, talking about the fact that 5 years after the two new federal bureaucracies aren't meeting their own targets for improving the lives of Indigenous people. And I quote, you said they cannot meet their own targets, which is surprising. They're also failing to keep their targets consistent over time. Earlier on in your comments, you also referred to the fact that out of the 42 performance targets set by IC, a quarter or less than that of these results are consistent with the targets that the department set for themselves. So I want to drill into a solution-based idea for a second here. We have an order paper question that we received an answer to not too long ago that says 95% of the ISC executive level or above and 92% of CERNAC at or above executive level received bonuses totaling about $5 million in 2021-2022. Now, in the response, it clearly states that individual performance pay holds executives accountable for individual results and is not related to departmental results which measure organizational goals. I referred earlier to an organization that I was part of where I've had this history of working with the management system that we're talking about here. And in my experience, the executive compensation component at our organization was 85% based on the organizational goals and 15% based on the personal performance goals. Do you think there's maybe some, and this is bigger than just ISC and CERNAC, because I think this is across government, right? Do you think there's some merit in suggesting the fact that we should actually tie performance, like at-risk pay and bonuses, to organizational achievement rather than individual achievement?
I don't see how somebody or a majority of executives can have at-risk pay, can have performance pay if a department only meets half of its targets. So is there merit? I think there's more than merit. I think it would be common sense. However, there might be other issues that why the government is not moving in that direction, but it seems to be quite obvious. And now you've made me answer a question that has definitely made me lost the only friends I had left in government.
I sincerely apologize for that, but I mean, we're looking to fix things here. We're looking to make the lives of people better. And when I look at this, I'm going, if you don't tie, there's an old saying that says, what you incent gets accomplished. And I would suggest to you that we're not incenting the right things with the way we systematically do the at-risk pay and the bonus pay across government. So I have a couple minutes left, and I'm going to move into the conclusion of your report, because I'm going to guess this is my last shot to ask questions today, right, Madam Chair? So we've talked a lot about the targets and the goals and all of that, and I'm going to be frank, basically that when I look at this, I would suggest that neither department has been very good at achieving some of these targets, and I think you would probably agree from your comments. So do you have something specific? What recommendation would you provide to the leadership of these departments? And in my case, I'm specifically talking about ISC, because that's the file that I look after or respond to. Is there some specific suggestions that you have that might actually lead to improved outcomes and the ability to assess results in a more positive manner?
More seriously, you've touched on an important point, tying executive performance to the attainment of corporate targets and these also mean government-wide priorities and targets. So it's a very good first step. And then setting themselves ambitious targets. So it's good to be ambitious. It's not the end of the world to fail to meet ambitious targets, but it's great to do it. I'm sure these departments are excellent at doing a couple of things, but the performance indicators that we see do not clearly indicate that. So it would be good to have clear performance targets that are ambitious and reward excellence in these two departments. It's very hard for me to believe that 95% of executives had a great or an excellent year. We all go through life events that make us have a bad year every now and then. So it suggests that it's seen as an entitlement. And it's not just these two departments. I think it's public service-wide.
But if we, and I'm going to close with this because I know I have a few seconds. If we tie performance incentives, at-risk pay to department goals, and we set goals that we're consistent with, and we maintain those goals that we're trying to achieve, and we do some things well, at the end of the day, we're going to serve people better than maybe what we're seeing as the results of some of these reports.
And I think that should be the penultimate goal of every public servant. And I think it is for the vast majority of them.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. We will now go to Mr. Poleski, and I think you're splitting your time with Mr. McLeod.
Who am I? Okay. And anyhow, I know the summary says, despite increased spending, the government hasn't met or the department hasn't met its targets, the DRIs, right? But I'm looking at the DRIs and wondering, like what this actually means. So I'll give you some of the DRIs. The percentage of First Nation adults who rate the quality of healthcare services delivered in their community as good or excellent, the target is 57%. Actual results are 55.2%. But then there's a little asterisk there. The asterisk is that data was 5 years old because the data is collected from First Nations Regional Health Survey, and that's every 5 years, so they haven't done it in 5 years. Then the next one is percentage of prior approval requests for medication coverage completed within 24 hours. Now, here the target's 100%. Now, what kind of an administrator creates a target of 100%? Because nobody's going to get to 100%. It might be my somewhat cynical view of administrators is you set a target which you can easily meet, and then when you meet it, you claim success. So who would, and if I had any criticism, it would be, why would you create a target of 100%, which is unachievable? But anyhow, they actually met 98.4%. So, okay, they didn't meet their target, but come on, that's pretty close. Now, another one is percentage of eligible First Nations and Inuit who received at least one non-insured health benefit in a year. Target 74%. And from the results from 2020, 2021, it was 67%. But that's under a time of COVID, right? And you look at non-insured health benefits, that's like dental stuff, psychological care stuff, which means going from wherever you live to some other community. So who's going to want to do that? So as I go through and then I look at the other ones, the next ones, again, percentage of First Nation adults who reported being in very good or excellent health. Target was 44%. It was only 37.8%. But again, it was 5-year-old data. So as I go through these, nothing jumps out to me is this is really bad. We're not meeting the indicators and we spent a lot of money. So which of the indicators did we really go awry on and that we clearly didn't meet? Because these ones I'm looking at, it's hard for me to get too excited about it.
You're right. It's hard to be very excited about. And you quote survey results from 5 years ago. For a department that spends billions on healthcare funding, to use a survey result, healthcare is good in your community 5 years ago, or eligible First Nations and Inuit who receive a benefit, that doesn't tell me anything. Are they in good health or not? I think that should be the performance indicator. If you receive a benefit because you're diabetic and you're suffering from, I don't know what kind of ailment, that's not a good indicator. If few people receive a benefit in a community, it might be an excellent thing because they're very healthy. So I think that speaks to the problem of having good performance indicators. And the ones that we heard, except for the ones who report being in good or excellent health, that I think is good. The rest, it's worth what it's worth, in my humble opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Pileski. Mr. McLeod?
Thank you. One quick questions, and it's based on a response that you made regarding self-governance. And you indicated that you found that there wasn't enough performance outcomes tied to some of the funding agreements. I'm very disappointed to hear that's how you measure the relationships with Indigenous nations. As an Indigenous person, I'm hoping, we move quite a ways past the paternal attitude from federal governments and provincial territorial governments, and we're working towards truly a nation-to-nation type of arrangement. Now, I would expect we would come up with funding arrangements such as our self-governing fiscal policy that would be able to allow the Indigenous governments to govern themselves and do it how they see fit, not compared to how we funded band councils and analyzed their performance up to now. So could you just maybe clarify if you're still using the same measuring stick that we've been using for the last 150 years when it comes to band councils and Indigenous governments to the new relationships that we're developing and signing agreements with?
So just to be clear, my comment was should not have been construed as my opinion on the type of relationship the Crown should be having with First Nations communities. I was responding to a question about specific performance indicators that were a bit more difficult to attain or to measure, to be more precise, and that was not a comment on the type of relationship at all. I was rather explaining what some of the departmental results indicators were, or some of the wording that explained that in our report was what that was referring to.
One
We're
more
out of time,
question.
Mr. McLeod. I'll have to go to Madame
okay.
Bérubé. 2
Thank
minutes
you.
et demi.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You mentioned earlier, among other things, that targets are not always relevant given the set targets. Why do you think there's this discrepancy between these targets? And can you explain the process of setting the targets in view of the objectives? It seems that, a target automatically comes with an objective. I had that problem myself when I worked in the public service. It's always difficult to set objectives that are going to be ambitious. We tend to go for targets or indicators that we're already familiar with. Instead of measuring a result, you're going to measure the output. What did you produce? How much did you spend? Rather than the ultimate result you're seeking, people in good health, children who are developing well in their family environment. Instead of measuring that, we're going to measure how much money, how many employees. Yes, the set targets are strange. How do we resolve that? By establishing targets that are based on the objectives departments want to attain. So the departments themselves need to have a bigger say in setting their targets. And maybe a committee such as this could be called upon to suggest performance indicators or targets, or at least the most appropriate indicators for departments.
I'll say 2. Ms. Sidlow, you have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much. So this government, I think, well, not just this government, but the federal government has been doing work for about 150 years. So they've seen, I don't know how economics really work, but they've seen inflation a few times. So I'm sure they know how to meet when there's an inflation, how to make sure that when they are setting targets that they factor in those kinds of external things that they might not be able to have control of. But time and time again, we see First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities being made promises to targets that are made. So, for example, one of my communities of Arctic Bay had an agreement with the federal government. I'm pretty sure it was either CERNAC or Indigenous Services Canada to fund Arctic Bay for a marine infrastructure project, a small craft harbor. About 3 to 5 years later, that project has not yet been established. The community of Arctic Bay say that they've been answering all the questions so that this project can go ahead. One of the recent excuses that they've been given is that inflation has made it difficult. So the budget that was originally allowed has not been able to be met because of inflation. And I wonder if that's what you mean by these moving targets. But at the same time, hasn't these types of governments now been able to factor in such external factors so that if they sign agreements that allow projects to go ahead, that they should be able to do so?
So I cannot comment on one specific agreement, but inflation has increased the cost of doing business in many communities, and Arctic Bay, I'm sure, is no different. But inflation has also increased government revenues through more income taxes, more sales tax revenues. So on the one hand, yes, it costs more to repair or build some installations, some assets. But on the other hand, there's more revenue coming in. So you're right, inflation has been around before, so we should know how to treat how to deal with inflation. So blaming inflation is probably a good reason why it costs more. But on the other hand, there's more revenues. But when an agreement is signed, usually it tends to have to be honored. So I can't speak to that specific one, but if you get a chance to ask ministers when they appear, I think that would be a very good question to put to the minister.
So in terms of...
Thank you very much, Ms. Edlow. We're actually out of time. But on that note, we're going to, we'll be adjourning for today. But thank you so much for your time this afternoon and your testimony. I really appreciate it. And we will have the ministers with us on Wednesday. So thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned.